G'day! In this lesson we will implement the security using the authorization and the permission systems available in the ABP framework. The ABP framework provides an authorization system based on the ASP.NET Core's authorization infrastructure. One of the major features on top of the standard authorization infrastructure is the permission system, which allows to define permissions which can be enabled and disabled per role, user or client. A permission must have a unique name. The best way to define it is a constant, so we can reuse the permission name later. Let's open the Bookstore Permissions class inside the application.contracts project in the permissions folder and change the contents using the following code. This is a hierarchical way of defining permission names. For example, create book permission name is defined as bookstore.books.create. ABP doesn't force us to use this structure, but it's useful nonetheless. We should always define permissions before using them. Let's open the Bookstore Permissions Definition Provider class inside the application.contracts project in the permissions folder and change the contents with the following code. The class defines a permission group to group permissions on the UI. There are 4 permissions inside the group: create, edit, delete are children of the bookstore permissions.bookstore.default permission. A child permission can be selected only if the parent is selected. Finally, let's edit the localization file en.json under the localization/bookstore folder of the domain.shared project and define the localization keys used in the permissions, which we created in the previous step. As previously mentioned, localization key names are arbitrary and not a forcing rule, but we prefer to use the convention nonetheless. Once we define the permissions, we can see them on the permission management module. Let's switch to Visual Studio Code and run the application using the yarn start command. We then navigate to Administration, Identity, Rules page, and then select the Permissions action item for the admin role to open the Permission Management module. We grant the permissions we want and save the module. If we ran the DB Migrator console, then these permissions would be granted to the admin role automatically. But since we already have a database, which is already seeded, we don't want to drop the database and run it again. So we won't do this step. Now that we have defined the permissions, we can use them to authorize the book management page. Let's open the Book App Service and add the following code to the constructor. The base CRUD app service automatically uses these permissions on the CRUD operations. This makes the application service secure, but also makes the HTTP API endpoint secure, since this service is automatically used as a HTTP API endpoint, as explained before in the Creating the Server-Side lesson. We will also see the way of using declarative authorization using the authorize attribute later while developing the author management functionality. Now we will secure the Angular UI using guard configuration. The first step is to prevent unauthorized users from seeing the Books menu item and entry to the book management page. Let's switch to Visual Studio Code and open the book-routing.module.ts file located in the src/app/book folder and replace its contents with the following code. Notice that we have imported the auth guard and the permission guard from the @abp/ng.core library. We've also added the can activate auth guard, permission guard to the route definition. Now we will open the route.provider.ts and add the required policy bookstore.books to the /books route. In order to hide the new book button, we will open the book.component.html file and replace the create button HTML contents with the following code. The *ABP permission equals bookstore.books.create hides the button if the current user has no permission. We will proceed and do the same with the edit and delete action items in the Actions drop-down in the book.component.html file. Let's save the files, and since we already had the yarn start command running, the code will auto-compile and get loaded into the browser. Let's test the application using a user that doesn't have permission to create new books. Notice that the user can't see the new book button. Let's test the application using a user who doesn't have permission to edit or delete the books. Notice that the user can't see the delete or the edit buttons in the Actions drop-down. Now we will test the application with a user who doesn't have access to the books management page at all. Notice that this user can't see the books menu item. In this lesson, we implemented security using the authorization and permission system available in the ABP framework. Join me in the next lesson to build the domain layer for authors.